Let us do the revision of governance areas, and also let us talk about corruption as a topic which is giving a question every year for us in UPSC. Now see the corruption as a topic. If you observe this, the questions are majorly of two types. One related to causes of corruption, and then fight against corruption. In this we have causes of corruption, fight against corruption. These are the two areas they are interested to ask the question. In the fight against corruption, they are talking about legal framework in India. One area they are interested is legal framework to fight corruption in India. And in this, sometimes they are going specifically into laws. So, one question was asked on whistleblower protection law in India. And there are other questions which are more related to institutional mechanisms. In the institutional mechanisms, he asked a question about Lokpal. Institutional mechanisms on Lokpal. And then social framework to fight corruption. The social framework to fight against corruption. Right, these three areas they can ask us a specific question. Or last year question, if you observe in the causes of corruption, they spoke about the cultural aspects related to corruption. Cultural, administrative aspects related to corruption, and then political aspects related to corruption. That's how we can broadly divide them as. So they may specifically ask to you about cultural aspects related to corruption. That's what previously asked. Or they may go to legal framework to fight the corruption in India. In this, specifically about a particular law. This year this becomes very much important because of amendments to Prevention of Corruption Act and also notification of Benami Transactions Prohibition Act. Notification of Benami Transactions Prohibition Act. So these two are very much in the news. And there is another person, an enforcement directorate official. He has filed a petition in Supreme Court that he has been hounded by the 2G spectrum accused because of his investigation, Rajendra Singh or someone. So from that perspective, if they ask, another dimension is protection of honest officials. Protection of honest officials. That's where the issue can come from. Protection of honest officials from frivolous complaints. How to protect honest officials from frivolous complaints. And with regard to political, administrative, and then we have something called cultural aspects related to corruption. Now broadly let us discuss it this way. The corruption is grand corruption, petty corruption, that's how we can divide it as. A grand corruption is destabilizing corruption, mostly political corruption. Petty corruption is normally equated with administrative corruption. But most of the times, the petty corruption itself manifests as with grand consequences. Or corruption can also be divided as two types, collusive and coercive corruption. When both the parties involved with the corruption, if they are coming together, then it is collusive. In the collusive corruption, parties involved becomes benefited from each other. And then in coercive corruption, there is one victim. And on the other side, we have a person who is, benefiting. So that's why coercive corruption is more visible, but collusive corruption is more damaging. Collusive corruption is more damaging. And then, after this, in the corruption we have another dimension. Because now after liberalization, LPG era, we thought corruption will decrease, but corruption has increased. Why? One fundamental thinking, right, initially before LPG era, the situation in India was that of scarcity. We had scarce resources in India. But after 1991, after LPG era, the resources have become surplus. Before it was license Raj, it was stated as the reason for corruption. But license Raj is also done away with. So, doing away with license Raj and then bringing in surplus in material resources, it is meant to decrease the corruption, but corruption did not decrease, but it has increased. Why? After LPG era, why did the corruption increase? Not just the increase in incidence of corruption, but also there is an increase in size of corruption. What makes it so is the question. So, this is what is the exact question posed by Mr. N. Ram. Corruption is here to stay. That's what is the book which is written by N. Ram. What he says is, corruption will not move away. So, the corruption is bound to increase. That's what his skeptical view. Why he says so? The reason he cites is, the public and private, between these two, the difference is ending now. And in this context, previously there was a wall between public and private. Now private is more and more engaging with or coming to an understanding with the public. So, privatization of public is the major reason for the growth in corruption. And this has provided for the sacred space which the public institutions have enjoyed, that is getting diluted and filled with lobbyists. So previously public space was sacred, but now the public space is getting filled with various pressure groups and interest groups. This rise in pressure groups and their importance is also one reason. And the second thing is, after LPG era, the state capacities have dramatically decreased, and this is the reason for the growth of corruption. And third, the nature of the corruption has changed after LPG era. Previously it was coercive corruption, now we have shifted towards the collusive corruption. And then, the politics has become a basis for the corruption in administration. So the political corruptions and degradation of the political value system, that is the major reason. And the capitalistic mode of production also has to be a reason for increased corruption. That's what he says. A capitalistic mode of production always centers around greed. So this greed has reduced the value system in our society. And possession of wealth has become an important objective rather than possession of a value. So economy or money possession has become a value in itself. The people value the money possession rather than the values per se. So these are all the changes that have occurred after the LPG era. And LPG era has brought in transactionalism and contractualization. So many of us think that after LPG era, states' powers have decreased. In reality, the states' budgets have increased after LPG era. Today we are talking about lakhs of crores of the state's budget. So because of the increase in budget, the revenue of the state has tremendously, revenue power of the state or bureaucracy has tremendously increased. So in this context, one way the revenue is increasing. On the other way, previously government used to spend the revenue by itself. But now, government is contracting out various programs. And in this process of contracting out, government shall be able to effectively monitor the outcomes of these programs. Governments do not have necessary capabilities to monitor these outcomes. So it means the government's scope of work has expanded, but capabilities did not expand. And government scope of work has expanded in contracting out the works to private sector. There is a lot of money with the government, but government is giving out this money to the private sector to perform in the name of efficiency. Neither the efficiency is increased in public programs, nor the outcomes are better, but the expenditure has tremendously increased. So, according to Enron, the government power has decreased after LPG era. This is a big myth. The government power, bureaucratic power, indeed has increased. But the regulatory power has decreased, but monetary power of the state has increased. Write down this. Regulatory power of the state decreased, but the monetary power of the state has tremendously increased due to increase in revenues.
Monetary power increased.
Increased. The amount of the money disposed by bureaucratic officials, the amount of the money budgeted by the politics have tremendously increased. The regulatory powers, it means the license Raj has been dismantled. License Raj is dismantled. Now, the second phenomenon identifies is state capacities are low where they are required. State capacities are high where they are not required. It means we have overemployment and underemployment, both of them are simultaneously existing in Indian system. And Indian system appears to be moving towards participative governance, appears to be moving towards decentralized governance. In reality, what is happening is centralization. That is the second observation. Indian system is not moving towards participative governance, it is just mimicked that way. What is really happening is centralization. So if we carefully observe, the powers of Prime Minister's office, powers of cabinet secretariat, central secretariats, these are increasing. At the cost of the local governments, there is no real transfer of the powers to the local governments. And the powers possessed by the local governments are just symbolic. So, under the myth of decentralization and participative governance, what in reality is happening is centralization. So, what is facilitating this? That is technology. And technology has facilitated a greater centralization in administration. And then, government apparatus has become too complex for citizen control. The government apparatus has become too complex for citizen control. It means, more and more we are talking about making the government machinery accountable. What we thought, the accountability can be brought in through greater social accountability. Social accountability, if it has to be brought in, world structures need to be collapsed, right? It means code of conduct need to be changed. And we need to bring in something called as code of ethics, etc. We are not bringing or changing the older structures, but we are stating that we are trying to implement the social accountability mechanisms. So these mechanisms which involve the people, they are only sporadic. They are only sporadic. And these are not widespread across the country, and their results are not consistent. So this is another problem with regard to the myth of decentralization and participative governance. So if we observe, social audit is stated to be successful in the states of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, but in reality we know the social audit is just a mockery of social accountability mechanism, and there is no proper action which was taken based on the social audit. So it means either the accountability structures, transparency structures, these are not shifting towards the participative approach. They are still in the world mode and world structures. But we are given a myth that something is happening. And in this myth, who is the major participant? Technology is the major participant. So through technological developments, technology is just an aid. Technology is just a tool. But projecting the technology and making something or information delivering to the people and itself is constructed as participative governance. But in reality, technology is working other way around, which is also bringing in centralized control. So these are the few points which are being critically written in this book. Corruption is here to stay. That's what by Mr. N. Ram. So the centrality of the book is this. The nature of the corruption has changed. So contrary to our belief that decentralization and participation is increasing, what is actually happening is centralization. Contrary to our belief that government powers are decreasing, government powers are actually increasing. The regulatory space, traditional regulatory space, which has come through license Raj has decreased, but the monetary power which is possessed by the bureaucracy and the politics has tremendously increased over years, especially after LPG era. Right, these are the things. And the next is the public space, which we kept as sacrosanct and a distance from private influence, is vulnerable for too much of private influence today. And then the contracting out, which has been practiced as a norm today in the LPG era, is actually leading to increased corruption because of lack of regular framework, gaps of accountability, and also imperfect sharing of responsibility in the public-private partnerships. These are the things which he tries to expose in that particular book. And added to this, what are the other factors that are leading to culture? What are the other cultural factors that are leading to corruption? And what are the administrative factors that are leading to corruption? So when we come to administrative factors, the first thing is, when we talk about centralization and decentralization, which leads to increased corruption, where the power concentrates, there higher corruption exists. So where the power concentrates, in centralization or in decentralization? Power concentrates in centralization. So in the case of the centralization, we have greater corruption. And second thing is, administratively if we observe, today more and more contractual jobs have increased. And these contractual jobs, it means they will be in position for 1 or 2 years. So in the process, does he have any permanent interest in the job? No. Is he worried about losing the job? No. So it means that is a increased basis for corruption or increased incentive for corruption or not? The changing nature of jobs, contractual jobs. Changing nature of jobs, more and more contractualization of employment in public services. They do not have necessary training or sense of permanency, or they do not have long-term interest in the public office. Obviously, they are vulnerable for other factors, extraneous factors like corruption. And what is the third thing? If you see our administration, many a times expenditure is not allocated for various protocol related expenditures and also various daily routine or miscellaneous expenditure in the government office. If you talk about police station, minimal stationery, all these are also not been provided for. So it means, which starts as a necessity, it obviously becoming an interest. So the corruption has become an administrative necessity in India due to improper allocation of the resources. Improper resource allocation for various administrative aspects. And then rules and regulations. Do India has complex rules and regulations or not? Many of the rules and regulations, they are multiple, often contradicting each other. What does that mean? We have two rules, and these two rules, these are contradicting with each other. So when they contradict with each other, what will happen? So obviously, increased discretion to the public official. I am standing at the crossroads, and then go right, go left. Which direction I has to go? That depends on me. So whenever the rules are multiple and conflicting, obviously the bureaucrat in the chair, he gets the necessary discretion. And this increased discretionary power, which is mostly situational due to multiplicity of rules, is another reason for the corruption. Another reason for corruption. Complex rules and regulations. And next is, we also have accountability gaps in India. Now if you take, when I was talking about CAG class, I told you an important point. Most of the developmental budget today is being implemented through public corporations. I gave you the example of Kapu Corporation, 1,000 crore rupees is the budget. and this corporation is audited by as per the statute of that particular law or particular organization, but not through the CAG. So the law will determine, law passed by the legislature will determine who has to audit this. Now most of the funds today, BC Welfare Corporation, Kapu Corporation, for everything a separate corporation is created. It means most of the funds, they are not under the purview of CAG. That's what Vinod Rai points out. It has to be, or else a law has to be expanded, CAG's Act has to be expanded to include every expenditure of the government. And you know, the public-private partnerships, where the public money is involved, these are also not within the scope of CAG's purview. And you got a recent committee on public-private partnership, Kelkar's committee or Kelkar's task force. What did it say? PPPs have to be brought under public-private partnerships. That's what Kelkar task force has spoken about. So it means we have accountability gaps with regard to India is concerned.
PPPs have to be brought under CAG.
CAG shall be able to audit the PPPs too. And then further to corruption. So corruption, developmental corruption, corruption and development. Here the corruption is very severe. We have this thing called developmental corruption. Now, we have this urban MEPMA, municipal poverty alleviation programs. We call them as MEPMA. So, MEPMA, how it spends the money in the form of cash. Most of the times, these urban poverty agencies, rural poverty agencies, they spend the money in the form of cash. So, MEPMA and increased presence of the cash in government developmental programs of the government, this is the major reason for corruption. Most of the MG Narega salaries, now we are transferring them to the accounts. But till yesterday, how the system was there? These are cash payments. So the developmental programs cash payments decrease, incidence of corruption also decreases. And then we have transparency laws. What are the transparency laws? RTI, etc. And transparency laws are being weakened. And the whistleblowers, these are being brought under the purview of Official Secrets Act. So why the whistleblower will reveal anything if he is brought under the Official Secrets Act? Right. Tomorrow, he can be prosecuted under the Official Secrets Act. Obviously, he will have that fear. And that way, Whistleblowers Protection Act was weakened. And then, RTI. So the capacities of the commissions, information commissions is very low. Capacities of information commission is very low. And if you see, in India, anything has to be weakened, accountability structure has to be weakened. How do they weaken that? Through overloading mechanism. So judiciary, how is it got weakened? Through overloading. Now RTI is facing the same problem. The number of cases pending before RTI are too many. That is, information commissions are too many. So RTI, Assessment and Analysis Group, RAG, a case study. What the RAG says is, in few of the states like Madhya Pradesh, if Information Commission has to adjudicate a case, it is going to take years together, 16 years. When the mechanism is so overloaded, don't you think it becomes useless? The mechanism itself becomes useless. So, do the people have the fear of RTI? So, do the people have the fear to devolve the information? No. So, the transparency mechanisms which were initiated, these are being throttled now. And master of every corruption is electoral corruption. So, in this case, electoral corruption in India is increasing or decreasing? The electoral corruption is increasing. And in the previous classes we saw, electoral bonds, they have increased the anonymity. So I told only 3 points can change the money power in the elections. What are these 3? Cash has to be done away with, transparency has to be brought in, and what is the third thing? If possible, we have to bring in state funding of political parties. These are the three things. And most important thing, if necessary, to clean our political system is regulation of political parties. Now, today's newspaper on Brexit, what it talks about, the Leave campaign has spent more than required money. In the referendum, £70,000, etc., they spend more. Because of this, Electoral Commission in the case of United Kingdom, it is conducting an investigation. Does Electoral Commission in Election Commission in India has the investigative powers? It has no investigative powers on its own. Does it have any investigative machinery? No. So it means the elections or election supervising body has to be provided with a strong powers to deregister the political parties. And political parties' accounts have to be audited by independent auditory bodies, audit agencies. And then cash has to be eliminated. And then total transparency in public funding to the elections or private funding to the elections. These are the things which can change the system. But Election Commission, can it deregister a political party? Election Commission, does it have powers to take actions on any erring political party? No. Only at the candidate level it can take some action. But at the political party level it can't do any action. So mother of every corruption is the political corruption. So unless we address the political corruption, administrative corruption cannot be done away with. And what are the other factors that are leading to corruption in India? Now, let us take some research over here. You know this formula, monopoly plus discretion minus accountability is equivalent to corruption. M plus D minus A. Monopoly plus discretion minus accountability is equivalent to corruption. Along with this, low salaries, weak policing, incentivizes corruption. In India, the biggest problem is salaries of the public servants are very low. And when when Indian economic system changed to capitalistic structure, when our system has changed to capitalistic structure, then what it has led to? So the gap between the public-private sector pay packages have remarkably increased. Previously, public sector job is prestigious, now no more. And the relative benefits enjoyed by private sector have become less. And obviously this comparative study has increased this particular challenge. Now, so what we need to say over here? So increased private competition and in the LPG era, rise in private sector salaries, relative deprivation with the public officials are feeling now. So that is another reason for the increase in corruption. And then, wherever there is parallel economy, there corruption is bound to be high. In India, parallel economy is huge. And then, the political economy in India is changing. Parallel economy, I don't think I need to elaborate on it. So, political economy in India is becoming more and more populistic. And this populism is kind of bribing the voters. Political economy is changing. And the welfare is getting narrowly defined as freebies. And this culture of freebies is providing for, or else is weakening the so-called as, what is that? There is a popular statement which has been stated as. So there is something called as expanded electoral corruption, which is called as, it means that though it is legal, more it is seen as a policy, it is actually trying to bribe the voters. In that case, the promises made by the political parties are never delivered. So which is making the political parties to lose their legitimacy. And another reason for the corruption is centralization in political parties itself. Centralization in political parties. And then, culturally, India has this Inam culture. Inam means what? Gift. So, this Inam culture has come from our medieval and ancient days. So, Britishers tried to replace this Inam culture. But this Inam culture is there in India from very beginning, to accept some gift for the work which they do. And this Inam culture has penetrated into modern rational administrative systems. And the tax structure in India also incentivizes corruption. So the tax structure, we have higher taxes and greater discretion to the public officials and complex system. So in this case, the higher taxes, higher exemptions, this provide for politics, business and bureaucracy nexus. Higher taxes, they provide for politics, business and bureaucratic nexus. And the worst part of this, which Rudolph calls as social acceptance of corruption, is very high. So if you go to most of the Eastern economies, either South Korea or Japan, there they consider corruption as a very big crime. Or it is seen socially as a big crime against the society. So it means the society do not accept the corruption over there. But in India, there is a general levels of acceptance to corruption. General levels of acceptance to corruption. And then, another thing is, power distance is very high in India. What is this power distance? Difference between powerful and powerless. This power distance is too high. So that's why the voice of the powerless to counter the powerful is less. That's why benefits which are meant for the weak and marginalized who are powerless are being cornered by the powerful. So the higher power distance, where powerful are cornering the benefits which are not meant to them by suppressing the voice of the powerless. Powerless. Now, the new changes. In this concept, lateral entry, will it lead to increased corruption in public services? That can be an expected question this year. So what is lateral entry? Now in India, to be exactly said, we do not have a lateral entry. What the government proposes for a limited deputation of the people for outside the government into government. A limited deputation. Amma?
We have some instances from the past.
Now, these people more worked as the advisors, but they did not take up the typical bureaucratic position. So these people are more like advisors. Now they are taking up the positions in hierarchical structure. So these people are never placed in the hierarchical structure before. Now at the level of the joint secretary, they are making private recruitments. Previously, whatever the recruitments which are being made, these are advisors. So they worked closely with the political executive, not with the bureaucracy. If you talk about economic advisor, chief economic advisor, he worked with the political executive. Now Sam Pitroda, brought in by the Rajiv Gandhi government, worked with the political executive. It has worked with the political executive. Not with the bureaucracy. They have worked more with political executive, not with bureaucracy. Are you getting my point? So now, within the bureaucratic hierarchical structure, we are looking at the lateral entry. That is private people coming in. Now, I will ask you I'll give you certain variables. How lateral entry will affect them, please let me know. So how the lateral entry will affect the career structure, career system. As of now, our bureaucracy is a career service. So how the lateral entry will affect the career service? Now, the number of positions available for career promotions gets limited or not? So there is a challenge for stagnation in public services as more and more private people occupy these coveted positions. There can be a chance for stagnation. Now I am due for promotion. Someone from outside will occupy that position. It means to that extent, my promotion is getting delayed. There can be a stagnation. So the stagnation, can it affect the morale of the civil services? And the second is competition. So now, previously, above the joint secretary, additional secretary, these kind of positions in various departments, who are manning these? IAS officers. Right, higher education, higher executive services, higher administrative grade. Now, who are going to be man these? Now we can have a limited opening. It means let all the central service also compete with the IAS. That is one level of opening up these posts for competition. And then let us open them for wider competition. People with the private sector also come and work with the government. So it means for a particular position, competition will increase or not? Competition will increase. So one is the stagnation can happen. So with the lateral entry, competition is expected to increase. Already government is trying to open all the positions above the joint secretary level for central services. It means the monopoly of the IAS over the higher administration in India is expected to end. It is expected to end. Now in this context, the third thing is, what will happen to the bureaucratic mindset? So we always criticize bureaucratic mindset as fossilized, closed, etc. When the fresh thing for outsiders comes up, can we expect some fresh thinking in bureaucracy? Probably. But bureaucracy is itself in an institution. Now, they try to protect their collective interests. Now, is there a chance with lateral entry to develop something called factionalism? So we are insiders, these are outsiders kind of attitude. So, is there a chance for development of factionalism within bureaucracy due to lateral entry? And the next is there a chance for nepotism? Nepotism. What is this nepotism? How it is possible with lateral entry? Let me put it this way. There are two schools of thought which I said to you. The one school thought, conservative thought, the other one is neoliberal thought. The conservative thought, what it believed, there has to be a constitutional body to recruit, a centralized mechanism to recruit into public services, to protect the trust of the people in the public services, to protect the merit system. What is the neoliberal or managerial theory talks about? So let us have a decentralized, departmentalized recruitment. What is the problem with the departmentalized recruitment? It can give rise to whims and fancies. Probably it may derail the entire merit system in the name of efficiency, and that unnecessarily brings in nepotism. So whenever we bring in lateral entry, how to minimize these nepotistic tendencies is a big question. Now, in the United States of America, we had this system, spoils system. So the spoils system, it has worst affected the administrative efficiency and raised the corruption. Then, are we bringing spoils system in the name of lateral entry? That is what is the question. Are we inviting spoils system in the name of lateral entry? And finally, so if you are bringing in lateral entry, you are believing that there is no much difference between public and private sector. But in reality, the mindsets of the people who work in public or private are entirely different. If you take about the private sector, profit orientation. Public sector, right, so welfare orientation. Now in this context, a person who has spent his life in the public sector, can we bring in a sense of welfareism or sense of welfare orientation to his mind? Probably it is difficult. And then what about the social empowerment, concerns of social justice? which the public employment possessed in India till date. How we are going to solve these issues of social justice concerns through lateral entry, in the lateral entry phenomenon. These are the things which are unanswered questions. Can you build the answers from this above? Right.
What could be the positives of lateral entry?
Specialization. You can invite the people who are specialized into the public services. And then fresh waters and open thinking. Fresh waters and open thinking. Fresh waters and open thinking. And then flexibility. Flexibility. These are the various things. But in India, it is a contractual job rather than lateral entry. As it was at the highest level, we are calling it as, we are giving a big word, lateral entry. But more and more, it is for a fixed period of 3 or 4 years. And it is more like a contractual employment in the public sector for the private sector people, but not the other way around. Then, lateral entry, it also involves public sector people being moved towards private sector and coming back to public sector. There has to be free movement between public and private sector. That's what happens in France. But in India, the lateral entry as a concept with the existing form or in the news is very limited and it's very shallow. Right? The next is, so they may ask you the questions like this. Write down one question. Corruption. Corruption cannot be fought through legal measures alone. It has its deep roots. India's socio-economic structure. Socio-economic structure. Elaborate. 2. LPG era has given new impetus to corruption in India. LPG era gave new impetus to corruption in India. Gave new impetus to corruption in India. To corruption in India. The third question. Technology cannot be a panacea for corruption. Panacea for corruption. It can only play a peripheral role. It can only play a peripheral role. Peripheral role. Overemphasizing technology can derail debate on corruption. Overemphasizing technology can derail debate on corruption. Comment. Right, that this is how the questions can come on a broader area. Straight question, they can talk about politics and business nexus has to be broken for the corruption to subside. Our electoral reforms is essential for corruption. Our reforms in political parties is essential to control corruption. Like that, politics in corruption they can ask you as a question. Now, what is the legal framework India has to fight the corruption? One is prevention of, write down the laws which we have. Prevention of Corruption Act. What is the problem with Presumption of Corruption Act? What are the problems with Prevention of Corruption Act? There is section 13(1)(d). So 13(1)(d), it means if a loss is caused to the government unintentionally, that can also be called as corruption. Under section 13 subclause 1 subclause D, any pecuniary gain to a private individual or an unintentional loss to the government also comes under the definition of corruption. A pecuniary gain to a private individual from the actions of a public servant or unintentional loss to the government, both the things can come under the definition of corruption under section 13(1) subclause D. So what does that mean? Let me give you Vijay Mallya example. Let's take Vijay Mallya. He wanted to pay some 5,000 crores by selling off its assets. And banker thought that, okay, we are at least getting 5,000 crores, let them take first. And he made an agreement with the Vijay Mallya. Now, you can see out of 10,000 crores, he is paying 5,000 crores. At least 5,000 crores we are getting, that's how we can see it as. On the other way around, how can we see it as? The banker made a loss to the government bank by 5,000 crore rupees. So, in what perspective, if you go by the definition of section 13(1) subclause D, we can assume that Mr. Mallya or else the banker has caused a pecuniary gain to Mr. Mallya, and he can be prosecuted. He can be prosecuted. And obviously, that is going to be a nightmare to any public official. And this section 13(1) subclause D is the major reason for any public official not to function within the limits of the law. It is the not to function or policy paralysis or decisional paralysis of the public official is majorly due to 13(1) subclause D. And many of the honest officials are being recently prosecuted. And even retired officials were also prosecuted. In the coal block scam, Mr. Parekh, and then I think in Meghalaya cadre, what is his name? Who was the secretary then, principal secretary to Government of India. So that person is said to be the most honest officer. He was also supposed to face the prosecution. So the reason is, they have allocated the coal blocks to the private people. And later it was presumed that allocation of coal blocks, it has caused the pecuniary gain to the private individuals. Now today, see by the logic, which private individual will work without any profit? Is the logic itself is flawed or not? Now let me say, under Vidyonati scheme, government has given me students. Now tomorrow, can they file a case on the secretary saying that she has caused the pecuniary gain to law excellence? So that's an agreement which has been reached. So causing any pecuniary gain to an individual is also considered as a crime under the Prevention of Corruption Act. It's a criminal misconduct. Did you get this? So if we want to bring in our proactiveness in the functioning of our public officials, what is required? That is what is. This 13(1) needs to be amended. So the Prevention of Corruption Act amendment bill is pending in the Parliament. The Prevention of Corruption Amendment Bill. So in that bill, the first thing is they wanted to amend this 13(1). And then presumptive guilt. It means that once the charges are framed on you, it is your responsibility to prove that you are not guilty. Normally it is the responsibility of the prosecution to prove that you are guilty. Now here you have to prove that you are not guilty once the charges are being framed. That is another nightmare to the public officials. Now, I have got some grudge on this public official. If I say he has a disproportionate assets, or his wife has so much of gold, or something, I complain to the officials. If they file the charges against him, then obviously it leads to, right, the liability lies on that particular individual to prove that he is not involved with corruption. This is one case. And then, so there is presumptive guilt. So that need to be amended. And the third thing is, this amendment bill is also criticized for this actually. We have in collusive corruption, both the individuals are involved, who are the bribe payer and bribe taker. In coercive corruption, bribe payer is actually a victim. Now, this amendment bill wants to make both the bribe payer and bribe taker as the accused. Lancham ichina nerame, teesukuna nerame. When you are paying the bribe, you are being forced to pay the bribe if you are a victim. So in this case, when you make the bribe payer also as a victim, he will not even report it to. Because he can be made as an accused by the law tomorrow. That's why he will not be interested to report. So in the amendment, they want to make both of them as the accused, bribe payer and bribe taker. So what is the logic of the government in that? So it takes the collusive corruption into account. In the collusive corruption, both of them are getting benefited. And also today, the bribe payer, if he says that simply he has forced me to pay the bribe, then he will be taken away from or moved away from the charges. He will be done away with the charges. So bringing them together as accused probably may weaken this particular law. And the next is, Supreme Court has given one important judgment on corruption, that is, so it's like this. Whenever we have a collusive corruption, both of them are involved with the crime. Both of them are getting benefited. As of now, with the existing act, the bribe payer can easily escape. But the government wants to tighten it by making both of them as the, charging both of them with the crime under the Prevention of Corruption Act. So in that scenario, what it been stated is, that will actually discourage the reporting of corruption. Reporting of corruption. That's what is the scenario. And the second is, as on today, permission of the government is necessary to prosecute an official about the rank of joint secretary. And any political executive has to be promised or prosecuted. Governor's permission is necessary. So most of the times, the political executive do not provide for the time to prosecute a public official. So there is no time frame defined under the Prevention of Corruption Act to provide or to levy the charges against this public servant about the rank of joint secretary. Lack of proper time frame is the bigger challenge. So in this context, what it has been stated, within 3 months, the decision has to be given. Either prosecution be allowed or prosecution not to be allowed. Prosecution, there is no time frame stated to allow for the prosecution. So section 13, 1 subclause D is to be amended. They want to provide a time frame for the prosecution, and then they want to bring in both the people, that is payer and taker, into the ambit of the definition of corruption. And then that's what they wanted to do away with. And retired officials, they wanted to extend the cover of immunity, whatever is been given. That is, prior permission for prosecution, as of now, is not available for the retired officials. And this prior permission of the political executive for prosecution is also being extended to retired officials. It is being extended to retired officials too. Right. Anyhow, I'll give the notes on this handout. So it means as of now, this particular protection for prosecution is available only to the serving officials. It means there is a prior permission of the political executive to file the charges against them. But it is been given or extended to retired officials now. That is the point over there. Right, did you understand Prevention of Corruption Act? And then Benami Transactions Prohibitions Act, it has been notified. And under this, any individual who owns the property in any other name other than their family members, that can be considered as Binami property. Both the Binami and property holder are punishable under Binami Transactions Prohibition Act. And the government can confiscate the entire property under this. And then we have other laws. Whistleblower Protection Act. Whistleblower for Protection Act. And you know the government has weakened the Whistleblower Protection Act by bringing the whistleblower under the Official Secrets Act, purview of Official Secrets Act. And you know RTI, transparency, can also act as an antidote to corruption. But there is some biggest weakness in India with regard to corruption is concerned. Here, in the West, US or UK if you take, if any company registered over there is involved with corrupt practices outside, is also punishable. In India, our Prevention of Corruption Act, it covers the domain that is extending only to the within the country. They do not extend, or purview of our law will not extend for the corruption of Indians outside the country. And the second is, our corruption do not include the middlemen. Our Prevention of Corruption Act do not include the middlemen. And then our corruption law do not include private sector corruption. Private sector corruption. Now, if you are bringing in lateral entry, people from the private sector, do you need to have a data on the private sector corruption or not? As of now, there is no legal framework to fight the private sector corruption. There is no specific law. And it will be under our Indian Penal Code, under 420 Cheating Act, it has been filed with regard to private sector corruption. So, the private sector corruption do not come under this particular law as of now. Breach of trust, under these by IPC sections, they filed the case with regard to private sector corruption. So in India, the private sector corruption is growing, and the corruption of the Indians outside India is growing, and these also need to be brought under. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is a famous law in US that do not exist in India. Right. The next aspect is, so False Claims Act that need to be enacted in India. False Claims Act also need to be enacted in India. And then, to fight the collusive corruption, what we need to have? Proactive vigilance. Proactive vigilance. And then, with regard to institutional mechanisms to fight corruption, what do we have? Institutional mechanisms. We have CVC, CBI, these are all these, CAG, all these are accountability mechanisms. So, Lokpal, in India the biggest weakness is investigative mechanisms against corruption are very weak. The institutional mechanisms against corruption are very weak in India. Investigative machinery is very weak in India. So we have too many institutions to recommend for investigation. Ultimately, the investigative machinery is only one, that is CBI. When we take the Jan Lokpal bill versus the government Lokpal bill, the major demand was, let's bring in an independent investigative machinery against corruption in India. But we do not have that. So I gave you two examples which need to be quoted in your answer, which are perfect investigative mechanisms or institutional mechanisms to fight corruption. Independent Commission Against Corruption in Hong Kong, Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau in Singapore, CPIB in Singapore. These are one-stop solutions to fight corruption. They have their own prosecution machinery, investigative machinery, and they have the special courts to adjudicate on these matters. And what did I say? This anti-corruption machinery in India is a extension of police. So the police is itself corrupt. When the police itself is corrupt, how can this machinery be free from corruption? How can this machinery be free from corruption when the police itself are corrupt? So that's why they have created a new machinery in Hong Kong and Singapore to fight the corruption. And this is one-stop solution for fighting the corruption in the country. And even Prime Minister is there in its ambit. So here we need to study in detail the provisions of Lokpal. And Lokpal is in news recently because the Lokpal is not constituted citing silly reasons that the leader of opposition do not exist now. And it was amended, leader of opposition provision is amended for the appointment of the other officers like CVC. Why can't it be amended for Lokpal too? Why can't we make it as leader of single largest opposition party, the main largest opposition party? You can amend it that way. The government is not doing that. It means it is not willing to appoint the Lokpal. So that's why Lokpal was in news. But there are many provisions. I am not getting into this. Institutionally, our CBI is the investigative agency for the Lokpal. Or Lokpal, if it wants to use any other investigative agency also, it can use. But if you see, what are the problems of CBI? Whenever the word CBI comes, use the word caged parrot. Why is it called caged parrot? It is under the central government's control. And its actions are politically motivated. And the second thing is, the CBI do not have the machinery of its own. It has to depend upon the machinery which has been deputed from the state governments. And the third thing is, the CBI as an institution do not have its own prosecution wing as of now. And then, all the officers, main officers coming on deputation has no strong prosecution wing. And India prosecution is a weak point with regard to criminal justice delivery. In the Lokpal Act itself, CBI, along with the CBI law, the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act was amended. Now, director of CBI is no more appointed by the government. It has been appointed by, in consultation with leader of opposition, that has been changed. And then director of prosecution is created under CBI. Now, so these institutional mechanisms we need to understand. And in this institutional mechanism, we need to talk about proactive vigilance. Rather than reactive litigation, we need to have a proactive vigilance in India. Proactive vigilance is important rather than reactive litigation. So these are the few points you need to remember in relation to corruption. Did you understand this? Every year there is a question on corruption. I'm going to give you the full-fledged notes on corruption from this NRAM book and some case studies which he has provided. Try to quote these case studies in your answer. But the questions are majorly from legal framework or what are the causes of corruption. What they said, Lokpal, how strong it may be, it cannot end corruption. Why it can't end corruption? Corruption has multiple roots. And the fight cannot be simply from creating a strong law. When the strong law is we are unable to implement, that is useless. Strong law has to be supported with strong enforcement system. Enforcement mechanism is not there for Lokpal. That is one thing. The roots of corruption are not just in the legal weakness. These are there in the social structure. These are there in the political structure, etc. So like this, you need to generate the points with regard to corruption. Did you understand this? Next, let's see the question paper today. Through the question paper, let us revise. What is the time? Now, 9th question onwards, we have governance questions. Discuss the role of information and communication technology in the inclusive governance. Discuss the role of ICT in inclusive governance. So first we need to select a keyword. Manaki question, the problem with the governance question says, we feel that we know the answer, but we will not be able to answer them. Now if I ask you to write an answer, you will not be able to write this question only for the reason that it appears that you know 1 or 2 points, but elaboration becomes difficult. That's the problem which the students are facing in governance questions. Discuss the role of ICT in the inclusive governance. What are the points we need to write in this? What is inclusive governance is the first thing. Inclusive governance refers to? Right. An accessible, participative governance structures. An accessible, or else you need to develop your own definitions for these things. You cannot have permanent definitions for this. An inclusive governance is governance for all. An inclusive governance emphasizes on citizen-centric public service delivery system. Like that, you need to generate your own statement whenever this, because you know vaguely the concept, but you do not know the perfect definitions. Or inclusive governance talks about benefit for all, focus on weak and marginalized, underserved areas, and it provides for citizen centricity. Like that, 3 criteria you need to develop. You can. But what is inclusive governance? An inclusive governance, it has to emphasize on following things with specialized focus on weak and marginalized, and an efficient public service delivery system. And third thing is a citizen-centric approach in its rule making, etc. This is what is called inclusive governance. So in this case, how the communication technology provides that? Last mile connectivity of the services. Last mile connectivity. And second, increases affordability to public services. So cheaper and speedy services, cost effective and speedy services. And then 24/7 round the clock services. And right, that's what is direct services. So diminution of the role of the middleman and elimination of corruption. Elimination of corruption. And then efficient information sharing. Information sharing. Information sharing. But this can only happen when there is digital infrastructure, or else digital divide has to be minimized. So if we have the digital divide, it cannot lead to inclusive governance. We need to address the problem of digital divide first. So we are writing about role of ICT in inclusive governance. ICT can only help us when we have digital inclusion. Without digital inclusion, there cannot be digital literacy, digital inclusion. These are essential for inclusive governance. If not, instead of bringing in inclusion, it can lead to further divides between the people. That's how I can close this answer.
We discussed that technology is facilitating centralization.
No, that's what is the points which I spoke to you. Is technology is not everything. If this kind of question comes up, technology is a means. At the end of the day, technology can only be helpful if the technology is able to facilitate other things. Administrative reform. Even that point you need to write over here. ICT is just an instrument. So governance is a bigger question of reform. ICT can facilitate it. ICT is not a one-stop solution for inclusive governance. That has to be our perspective on that issue. Next. One size does not fit all. India's local governance structures needs serious reform. One size does not fit all. India's local governance structures needs serious reform. What is this about? Is asking specifically about having diverse structures for different regions with regard to local governance in India. So the 73rd, 74th Amendment Acts, they have provided for the necessary flexibility for the state governments to create local governance. But after neoliberal era has come into existence, the local governance structures are being bypassed and parallel institutions have come into existence. What are these parallel institutions that have come into existence? Now, parallel institution lectures, I told you in your local government classes, education societies, rather than providing for these services through local bodies, we are using the parastatal bodies. So there is rise in parastatal bodies, which is diminishing the role of local governments. And the second is, with regard to developmental framework, developmental planning, we have similar structures across the country. But if you take the tribal societies, we needed to have PISA Act has to be implemented, which is not being effectively implemented. So we need to talk about the financial distribution between the states and the local governments, which is not effective across the states. And it has left to the discretion of the states. So that's why Kerala and West Bengal are able to provide for better things. So in this scenario, a common law with the 73rd, 74th Amendment Act, it failed to provide for the solution to the problems of the local government till now. And then, northeastern states, they have very good local government structures, tribals, because of the tribal societies. But Finance Commission, when it makes allocations to the local finances, it do not give this attention, special attention to the local finances in the northeast. And then Finance Commission also do not make any special attention to the devolution that has happened in states such as Kerala. Right. And then, with regard to local governments, the capacities of the local governments are not one and the same throughout the country. So, recently what the government did, Pradhana Mantri, Rajiv Gandhi Gramin Sashakti Yojana, it has been disbanded. So, here we need to write, India's local governance structure, it has uniform structures in the form of the developmental, for developmental planning, resource devolution, and also for capacity enhancements. But these fail to serve all the regions equally. And the Finance Commission and its devolutions also did not take the weaknesses in capabilities in such local areas when compared to the others. And then, with regard to urban governance, historically urban areas did not have the uniform government structures across the country. 74th Amendment Act tried to create these uniform structures across the country. Right, these are the points which you can mention in. And growth of the parastatal bodies, those are all the points also you can talk about. After the neoliberal era, it appears that decentralization has come up. Decentralization did not strengthen the 73rd, 74th Amendment body, 73rd, 74th Amendment Acts. Decentralization has led to development of parastatals. Like I gave you this example, Sarva Siksha Abhiyan Samiti or something kind of this. Literary societies, the society structures are being created. And even if you take in the smart cities mission, Amrut, etc., the local governments are not being strengthened. These are actually special purpose vehicles are being created. And the government is trying to justify them. That is, one size does not fit all. That's why we are creating them outside the scope of 74th Amendment Act. But in reality, that is weakening the local governments. The next is, the government's new health insurance scheme should be based on evidence and transparency. Effective implementation of national health protection scheme will require robust governance process. I think already I discussed this question to you. When I discussed the health issues, I have discussed this. I gave you the example, Japan example I gave you. Unless proper regulation on prices is not there, any insurance-centric healthcare delivery model or market-centric healthcare delivery model will lead to spiraling of the health costs. Right. And the second is, we need the market-centric healthcare delivery model will not give rise to access to the remote areas. So, and third, this insurance-based mechanisms do not create permanent health assets. These only strengthen the insurance bodies. And fourth thing is, insurance do not decrease the out-of-pocket expenditure. It is a proven thing across the world. And National Health Protection Scheme also do not have all the diseases covered under it. So if the healthcare cost is increased and it is not comprehensive or universal, obviously it makes the poverty to sustain because of the health hazards in India. That's how we need to mention the points in this. I discussed this, if you remember, in the first class itself. Do you want me to discuss this again in detail? Amma? Right. So should be insurance scheme based on evidence. What does that mean? So as of now, the evidence suggests that whenever the healthcare scheme or healthcare is universalized or promoted based on market mechanism, there is increased healthcare costs. That is what is the evidence which shows as of now. So that's why there is a better governance, regulatory mechanism is necessary. That is what is the evidence what he mean over here. And what are the books from which I told you the points? Do We Care? Sujata Rao book. So there, what she suggested is increase the cost in private health establishments. Second thing which she suggested is emphasize on preventive health care. And then here, robust governance process, what it talks about majorly the regulatory mechanisms and improving the access to healthcare in different parts of the country. These are the things we need to. Although digital networks have penetrated into remote rural areas, their usage is still limited among villagers. Explain the reasons and action to be taken to improvement. It is ultimately a question in digital divide, infrastructure bottlenecks, digital literacy, e-affordability, because if you talk about net neutrality, on what points it has argued on? It has argued on affordability. We are bringing in e-affordability. The cost of networks is high. When we talk about the cost of network, you need to talk about size of data and also speed of data. Right. And then digital access, where we already discussed about the digital divide point. And the second is digital affordability also includes affordability of the instrument and then affordability of the network, affordability for speed. And the third thing is digital literacy is very poor in India. So because of this, we are unable to use digital networks effectively in the rural areas. And what are the steps which are being taken now? Common service centers under Digital India program and BharatNet. And what are the other things which we are bringing in Digital India? Digital Saksharata Mission. Okay, for network USOF. All these points which you can talk about. What are the things which we need to do? Right, those are the regular points. Educate the children in the schools. I mean, what are the policy level points we have to make to improve the digital or to make digital networks to penetrate into rural India? What are the actions to be taken to improve them? That's what is the question, second part of the question. One is infrastructure, we are already taking care of that. What else we have to do? Again, I told you the point, always remember in the governance. Last mile connectivity, decentralized systems. Last mile connectivity, decentralized systems. Then, and affordability, how can we increase the affordability? Affordability, innovation. Innovation in services. What are the examples for innovation in service delivery? Right. Innovation with regard to service delivery. And then, what are telelaw, telemedicine, whatever. What else? And more, digitalization of records and all these things which are happening. So, they're making them foolproof. So increasing the trust of the people on the digital services. Why the demonetization and digitalization are not successful? The trust of the people on the digital economy are less. What we have to do is the most important thing, raise the trust of the people on the digital systems. How can we improve the trust of the people on the digital systems? Consistency on services. Now, why the people are not following me in current affairs these days? I'm inconsistent. Honestly to be said. Because, I have my own problems, but whatever from the customer view, inconsistency, they complain that you are good, but you are inconsistent. Because, see, entire year you give the service. 1 week you stop. I'm not blaming. I'm trying to explain a point. Don't take me wrong over here. So, this 1 week when you stop, that is called inconsistency. Why? Now, you go to the ATM, it means it is assumed that you have to get the money. But where even once or twice it is not been delivered, you say ATMs are useless. That's kind of the attitude, because our mind is framed that it has to come every day. Now every day you get the newspaper, and one day the newspaper did not come, how do you feel? Right? The digital payments, this also suffers from the same thing. Consistency leads to consistency and reliability. This brings in trust of the people in these networks. So we need to increase that. So the consistency and reliability is improved, automatically people start using these digital services. That is the most important point.
So can we include points like difficult terrain of northeast states? And
that's where the new innovations for last mile connectivity, that's what I'm talking about.
Violence affected areas.
So that's where we need more connectivity these days. So when I said last mile connectivity, it means all these points covered under that last mile connectivity. Steps to take up the last mile connectivity. So in this, new innovations are necessary in the last mile connectivity. So 1 point, last mile connectivity addresses those issues. And what else the steps we need to take? Right, more and more services need to be brought under the ambit of digital services. Now with the use of Bhumi program, the use in digital services has increased in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. Bhumi. And then Andhra Pradesh is going ahead with, recently I was seeing video of World Economic Forum. Blockchain technology it is using to update the land records. So more accuracy, more reliability, that makes the people to come to the digital services. Ma? Let's talk about the villages.
Corporate social responsibility.
Right. There are 3 questions in this. For each sub-question, I need only 3 points. Right. Why we need to innovate the points when we have better points. Why we have to connect the remote points like cyber crime, etc. Let's talk about the main points. Demand of the question. Why to go for the remote points? The next is, reforming the civil services is one of the last vestiges of our colonial legacy. Discuss the need for reforms. Why the civil services have to be reformed? Very large, very broad question. We have a generalist services. We need specialists. We have closed services. We need to open them. We have career services. We need to expose them to competition. Corruption. And then, so we need to make development oriented. Regulatory administration has to transform more into development and people centric, and it has to work in a decentralized settings. These are all the need for reform. They are not asking what reforms are necessary. Discuss the need for reforms. So, discuss the need for reforms. That's a very straight answer. Closer to open, and then closer to competitive, generalized to specialized, and then what is that? Regulatory, a greater emphasis on development and more democratization of the services, and then it has to work with more and more with the democratic structures such as decentralized, that is 73rd, 74th. So the bureaucratic mindset has to be changed, and more power distance has to be decreased, and the empowerment of the citizens. and greater accountability into the public services, decrease in corruption. All this comes, which talks about the need for reforms. Now,
The last vestiges of our colonial legacy. Last vestiges.
reforming, it is not been done yet. Reforming of the civil services is not yet been done. It is still hanging. City is expected to generate up to 70% of new jobs in India, contribute about 70% of GDP by 2030. Facilitating better urban governance is the key to achieve socio-economic prosperity and sustainable development. Discuss. So, urbanization of poverty. So, one of the arguments is more and more poverty is getting urbanized, which is leading to slums, which is leading to decreased quality of life, which is increasing the urban crimes. Right. So, that's where urban governance need to be improved. And then, when urbanization of poverty is happening, all our poverty reduction programs are still focused on urban areas, the rural areas, sorry. So, MG Narega, rural program. What are the urban programs? They are very minimal. And then, this urbanization also increasing the costs of providing for the public services. Basic amenities, these are being costs of providing these services are increasing. So, and then, next is urban areas are growth engines. So, if they have to run as growth engines, so we need to integrate skill upgradation and integration of them in the greater economy. Those are the points. And the next is, urban governance has to be focused. What are the challenges of urban governance here? So, democratic governance. In urban governance, we shall be able to create democratic, inclusive governance in the urban areas, because the urban areas are the places of utmost inequality. With the urbanization of poverty, inequalities are bound to increase. These inequalities will create many governance challenges. Next, those are the points which we have to emphasize on in this answer. So, and then you can add more things, because urban governance, new challenges, not just the infrastructure. We have this urban terrorism which is growing. Urban terrorism, urban poverty, urban infrastructure, and then, right, urban planning, and then weak democratic institutions or institutional capacities in the urban areas. And then, with regard to United States and all these countries, urban governments are very powerful. But in India, urban governments, these are the appendages of the local governments. And here, urban governance is complex and confused with many parastatal bodies. Parastatals, what do we mean here? Now, Hyderabad Metropolitan Water Supply and Sewage Board. So that's why the accountability rein is not straight in the urban areas, that has to be streamlined. And again, you need to talk about the new urban programs which are not functioning under the unity of command of the democratic structures, that is mayor. And they are creating islands of urban prosperity in the ocean of urban poverty. So these are all the points, are the challenges to the urban governance. Right to public service legislation is needed to reduce corruption and to increase transparency and public accountability. Discuss. So now, citizen charters, what they are? This question is central to citizen charters, yes or no? Right to public services. What are the states which have passed the right to public services? Now, any quality public service, what all it needs. What is the time now? So, can I continue this class in the next schedule? Thank you.